Hello, my name is Janatra, Ramadhan, Artha, Siregar. In this video presentation, I will elaborate the study that has been held by a group of people, and the title of the study is Students Learning Strategies for Developing Speaking Ability. The writers are Sofyan Agani, Dian Fajrina, and Rizaldi Hanifa. The study was published in 2015, and the journal publication is Cielo Journal. First, introduction. What is the study about? The study is about to learn the learning strategies used by both low and high performance speaking students in developing their speaking skills, as well as the differences between their learning strategies, why there are students with higher speaking performance and why there are students with lower speaking performance. The reason behind this research is because the competency of many students in speaking English was considered unsatisfactory in Banda Aceh. It is important to study what kind of strategy that can be used to increase the quality of students at Banda Aceh in speaking so they can compete at higher level. It was discovered that each student from different levels used different language learning strategies which they considered helpful to them. In accordance with this, Ellis claims that the proficiency level of the learner influences his choice of strategy. Some of the students confirmed that their strategies give greater impact toward their learning process. Meanwhile, there were also several students who thought that their strategies only gave a small contribution. Hence, their learning may not have improved significantly. A study by O'Malley and Kemet in 1990 reveals that more effective students generally use a greater variety of strategies and use them in ways that help the student complete language tasks more successfully. So students with higher speaking performance, they use a more variety in their learning strategies. And then the gap in this study tries to solve the problem of the lack of capability on high school students at expressing ideas, thoughts, and feeling clearly. They surely face difficulties that hinder them to be competent at speaking, such as lack of vocabulary, poor or unusual pronunciation, and poor grammar. So in the study, the team tried to understand why there are a lack of vocabulary and why some students have a problem with the pronunciation and some students have a problem with a grammar. But sometimes the problem is not on the method that get implemented, but the learners themselves, and in this case it's the students' motivation to keep learning. And then we move on to the method. This study focuses on two questions. First, what are the learning strategies used by learners with low performance in speaking to improve their speaking abilities? And the second question is, what are the learning strategies used by learners with high performance in speaking to improve their speaking abilities? So basically, the team tried to understand the difference between high speaking performance students with the low speaking performance students. The data for this study was mainly taken from questionnaires and interviews that had been done by the subject, and the subject were second-year students from certain classes of SMA N3 Banda Aceh who had either low or high speaking performance results. And why second year? Because the second-year students have more experience with this thing. The qualitative researchers may also use written documents or other artifacts to gain an understanding of the phenomenon under study. They used students' achievement records prepared by the teacher for getting prior information about the high and low performing students' speaking ability. So the achievement records was prepared so it can give additional information about the students. All documents needed were collected and interpreted to verify the students selected for this research. The first method is questionnaires. The questionnaires use the strategy inventory for language learning, version 7.0, containing 50 items as an instrument for assessing language learning strategies used by the learners. But in this study, only 30 items were selected for the instrument of this study. And then the questionnaire consisted of 6 parts. The first one is remembering more effectively, or memory strategies. Second, using mental processes or cognitive strategies. The third one is compensating for missing knowledge or compensation strategies. The fourth one is organizing and evaluating learning or metacognitive strategies. The fifth one is managing emotions, affective strategies. And the last one is learning with others or social strategies. The SEAL's 5-point scale was ranged from never or almost never to always or almost always. So the subject have to choose between this option in each question. Then the next method is interviews. An interview involving self-observation which enabled the learners to think about what they generally do when faced with a familiar language task was also used to collect the data for this research. There are 5 questions for the interview, and the interview was held in Bahasa Indonesia. The first one is what do you do to improve your pronunciation. The second one is what do you do to improve your vocabulary. The third one is what do you do to make your grammar better. The fourth one is what do you do to improve your fluency in speaking. The fifth one is what do you do to improve your comprehension in speaking. During the interview, the data was recorded using a handphone recorder. To distinguish between a data and a non-data is a data is every answer from every student that has been chosen as a subject for this study. So the student from SMA N3 Banda Aceh, the second year student. And so all the data is the answers from these certain students, and other than that is a non-data, is considered as a non-data. And then we move on to the data analysis, how the data got analyzed. The data then got analyzed through different steps. First, after collecting the documents from the teachers, we noted and categorized the students with high or low speaking performance to identify the subjects for this research. Second, the data from the questionnaires and the interview was gathered and translated into the target language, and in this case is from Bahasa to English. And the third one is the data were further coded to classify the learners' learning strategies. The fourth one is the data was grouped into language learning strategies used by low and high speaking performance learners. So in here the data got split into a data that was taken from high speaking performance students and the data that was taken from low speaking performance students. Then it was analyzed based on high performing learners' language learning strategies, low performing learners' language learning strategies, and the differences between the language learning strategies used by both groups of learners. The fifth step, if the results of the document interpretation, questionnaire, and interviews were described in the form of a narrative, so it gets simplified. And finally, is the sixth step was to draw a brief conclusion of the research findings. And then we move on to the finding. In this research, they learned the difference of strategies that were used between high and low speaking performance students. High speaking performance students try to understand others, while low speaking performance students try to make others to understand them. Students with high speaking performance tended to ask their partners to use synonyms, speak slowly, use simple words, predicted meaning, ask for help, delayed their speech by paying more attention to their partners, observing their gestures and body language if they found it hard to understand what was being said. So they try to understand others. While to make sure their speech were understood, they would choose to explain clearly what they said by using synonyms and even a native language. They also used gestures and body language, repeated words or sentences being said, and asked for confirmation of their speaking partner's understanding. Meanwhile, students with low speaking performance, they tended to use common words, switch the language to their mother tongue because the limitation of the vocabulary, used gestures, spoke slowly, and repeated words to make sure the speaking partners understood what they say. If they did not understand what their partners were saying, they asked for help from their friends and tried to pay more attention to their partner's articulation of words, their partner's lips, and their body language. Besides, they sometimes asked for clarification if they were not sure of the meaning of what had been said. And in here we can see the table. It is the table of all the strategies that were used by each student, a student with high speaking performance and a student with low speaking performance. Here we can see that a student with higher speaking performance, they have 53 strategies that were used in their learning process. Meanwhile, the low speaking performance students, they have 29 strategies in their learning process. So here's the difference between high speaking performance and low speaking performance students. The higher speaking performance student, they have more strategies applied to their learning process. And then we move on to the discussion. Here we can see that low speaking performance students were usually use conversation and social strategies. They don't really use memory, cognitive, metacognitive, and affective strategies like the other aspects. While students with high speaking performance, they had more balance in their learning and practicing strategies that they use. The strategies of metacognitive, affective, and social were used more equally, which means the more strategies a student applied, the more understanding they get. The findings of the present study are in line with Garbafi and Mosafi and Peishi, which showed that the higher the level that learners are at, the greater the number of strategies they will apply. This result indicate that high speaking performance students seem to be more aware of their language needs. They think in improving their speaking performance is important thing. The high speaking performance student also spend time to practice to control their emotion, so they can keep the motivation to keep learning. And meanwhile, low speaking performance students sometimes apply strategies that were not very effective for completing certain language tasks, such as enhancing pronunciation by reading a dictionary and improving fluency by memorizing a sentence. And then the conclusion, the research findings showed that high speaking performance students use more learning strategies, and all of these strategies include the aspects of memory, cognitive, conversation, metacognitive, affective, and social strategies. They learned all of the strategies more equally, and they also more aware and more creative in using these strategies, which made them more successful in completing language lots. Meanwhile, the low performance students tended to focus more on employing conversation and social strategies than on memory, cognitive, metacognitive, and affective strategies to enhance their speaking skills. Thus, the low performance speaking students need to focus more on improving other learning speaking strategies. The low speaking performance students also need to practice the other aspects in their learning strategies, not only just social strategies and conversation. And finally, the implication. After we learn this study, now we have a brief comprehension to what makes someone have a high speaking performance and a low speaking performance. A lot of learning strategies are affecting the speaking performance quality of an individual. With this study, we can improve our speaking performance by applying all of the strategies that have been learned as strategies that can improve our speaking performance, which is a learning strategies that include memory, cognitive, conversation, metacognitive, affective, and social strategies, learning aspects. We also have to do the learning strategies as creative as possible to keep our motivation in learning. In future occasion, we can use this study to give a solution for people who struggle in learning and improving their speaking performance. So if there is someone that has been struggling to improve their speaking performance, we can take a look to this study and give some explanation about the aspects that they can learn in their learning strategies. So in that way, that person can widen up their learning strategies, not only just learn one aspect, but also include the other aspects. So in that way, the person can improve their speaking performance. And that was the presentation from me. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.